As we have often talked about here the last couple of years, the pandemic changed everything, and things are not going back to the way they used to be. And this week, I heard a new term that we're going to hear a lot more of in the coming days, and that term is a school board mom. So we've talked a lot about the fact that homeschooling exploded as a result of the pandemic. Another thing that we saw is that because of all the at-home schooling with the public schools that happened, a lot of parents for the first time became aware of exactly what their kids were being taught, what was included in the curriculum, what the teachers were using. And as a result of that, aside from the explosion of homeschooling, we've seen across the country more parents becoming directly involved in the school boards in their local school districts. And one of the terms for this is going to be school board moms. Moms who all of a sudden have become aware of what's going on in their school district, whether it is pornography that's in the middle school library or policies that they don't like, and we are seeing that play out today. Another good example of that was what we saw just this week. We tend to think that Texas is conservative. We don't have these kinds of things in Texas, and that is not true. We've seen that in school board races in Round Rock and the Austin area, the Cy-Fair ISD situation in Houston area. And this week we saw a situation that became a news story in San Antonio as an elementary school in Northside ISD did a quote-unquote experiment. What was this experiment, you might ask? Well, this teacher decided to segregate her students based on their hair color. So black and brown-haired students were in this group, blonde and red-haired students were in the other group, and then this experiment went like this, that the blonde and red-headed students were told they were not as smart as the other group. They were told that they couldn't compete as well. They were actually given games with pieces missing, so their teams could not win. What does this sound like to you? Does this vaguely sound like racism? Well, that's exactly what it was. In fact, they also showed these students a film of three little black girls who were killed in an Alabama bombing years ago by the KKK. And when parents complained and went to the media, the school district refused to do an interview, but they put out a statement saying, well, maybe we should have let parents know. Maybe this was inappropriate. And of course, that is exactly the point. So parents are being upset, and rightfully so, because the schools are adopting, even here in Texas, as we've seen, this leftist wokist mentality trying to push what they believe is a policy on the students. We saw another story this week that also demonstrated this. In Florida, they just passed a parental education bill of rights, and that bill simply says this: that parents get to review any curriculum that's being taught in the school. And secondly, they said in kindergarten to third grade, we are not going to do sexual orientation or sexual education of students. That might seem pretty reasonable to most parents. Yeah, and yet the left exploded. The Democrat leftist highlighted that bill as the quote-unquote "don't say gay" bill. And the legacy media pushed that narrative that there was this huge opposition to this bill. Well, that narrative is not exactly true based on a poll done by the Daily Wire, in which they interviewed or polled 1,000 parents across the country. They oversampled Democrats by 3 or 4 or 5 percentage points. And guess what they found out? 65% of the parents they polled across the country said, you know what, we kind of like that. We don't think kindergarten to third grade students ought to be exposed to sexual education or sexual orientation. And yet that is exactly what the left is pushing. So I think this highlights the whole argument, at least that I'm arguing today. The issue is, Are children worth fighting for? You know, the reality is we get tired of the politics. We get tired of this policy stuff. And I have parents who say, I just want to go back to doing things and taking care of my kids and raising my kids. Well, unfortunately, the issue for us today is, are our children worth fighting for? Because that is what is at stake with the leftist woke mob that wants to take over our culture. So I hope you'll click on the links below for more information and links to these stories. I hope you'll share this video. I hope you'll give it a like. I hope you'll subscribe to our channel. And I hope you'll help us in our quest to keep Texas families free.